So why did hypnosis get this bad rap, this bad idea? Why is it said that it is dangerous? And the best we could figure, and there are people who make a living studying the history of hypnosis, and they'll tell you the same thing. What happens is this. We're all hypnotized already. It's really interesting because when I was younger in the business, people used to come to me and ask me, well, you're a hypnotist, right? And I say, no, I'm not. And say, well, but I thought I came here to see you because you're a hypnotist. I say, no, I'm actually a de-hypnotist. And they say, what? And I would tell them what happens is that we're all hypnotized already. See, the reason why you're here and you tell me that you're sad is because you're being hypnotized into feeling sad, or you're being hypnotized into feeling that you can't, or you're being hypnotized into thinking that you are whatever. All we're going to do is not hypnotize you, but de-hypnotize you. And that conversation I thought was really clever, of course, but it didn't really go very far, so I dropped that idea. And I just say that I'm a hypnotist now. It's a little bit simpler. But the truth is that we're all hypnotized already. And when you pay attention to this idea of hypnosis, there's a long history of attacks towards people who have attempted to de-hypnotize other people. The first one that comes to mind in recent history was about 2,400 years ago. His name was Socrates. Ever heard of this name? Socrates was charged with a very interesting crime. Does anybody remember what he was charged with?
Corrupting the young?
Corrupting the youth, corrupting the young. Think about that for a second. You know, and one of the most brilliant texts in history is still called the Apology. That's when Socrates, defending himself, he doesn't hire an attorney, right? He defends himself. He goes to court and says, well, if what I did is wrong, this is what I did. And here's what he did. You got to remember this because this is really important. We cannot take that trial out of the historical context. Think about it this way. Athens was a mighty, mighty, mighty empire. It was like the United States. Athens, in other words, we talk about the Greek nowadays, but Greece, as we know it, did not exist. Back then, every city was its own state. Like every city was a country. So Athens was a country in of itself. But Athens was a very powerful city-state, the most powerful at the time, in the region at least. And they fought a war, a 28-year war. How long was the Vietnam War?
Same, 20 years.
It was about 20 years?
65 to 70,
73, right?
73,
Yeah, it was, well, 56 was when the French were there. I think the Americans got in 65 or so.
Officially,
yeah. Yeah, about.
So the advisors showed up at 56, and then the first capture was 65.
Yeah. All right, so let's say from the first American troops on the ground, 65 to 73, we have about what?
13.
Okay. Well, this was a 28-year, very, very bloody war against Sparta. And Sparta was like, I don't know, like what? Like a tiny, tiny little, they're very inferior militarily and economically speaking. Guess who won the war? Sparta, not the Athenians. So the mighty Athenians, the proud, the better ones, lost a very bloody war. And so the Athenians were deflated, dejected. They felt bad. They couldn't understand what happened. That wasn't supposed to have happened, but they did. It was called the Peloponnesian War. They lost the war. It is at that time that Socrates surfaces. And he surfaces in public life with a new voice, attempting to help people get out of their grief. How come we lost the war? If we're better than the Spartans, how come we lost the war? And what really happened there, and the reason I mentioned and compare it to the Vietnam War, was because it was not a military problem or an economic problem. It was a cultural, religious problem. You see, the religion that prevailed in Athens at the time was this religion of Homer and all of the gods and so forth, and they would pay homage to all of these gods, and they were not allowed to fight the war in military terms. They had to fight a war in religious terms, and therefore they lost. And so Socrates presents an alternative. He presents the process of philosophical inquiry. Let's question ourselves. Are we doing the right thing? What is the right thing? What is beauty? What is a virtue? What should we do? He begins to question. And what happens when we question something? Every time you question, you're working with reason as opposed to what? What prevailed in Athenian culture prior to questioning? faith. In other words, faith in this particular religion. The corruption of the youth that he was charged with was this process whereby he was taking people out of their religious comfort and helping them question themselves. In other words, he was literally dehypnotizing people.